Is mis donna cholera. Is mis Chapter Dála, the Cork Glár Haas. I'm the Sinn Féin TD for Cork South Central, and I'm really delighted to welcome you all here to the Rochestown Park Hotel for this discussion, which is being hosted by Sinn Féin's Commission on the Future of Ireland. This event is an opportunity to explore the opportunities for Cork and for Ireland as a whole in a new and united Ireland. I think you'll all agree that the Spirit of Cork is perhaps best known on our hurling and football pitches, a sport that brings together the 32 counties of Ireland, that expresses our fierce national expression of who we are, our hopes and our determination to go the distance and inspire. And though, unfortunately, Liam McCarthy, the Holy Grail for Cork people, has eluded us for a bit of a while, we've never stopped believing. We have never given up. And perhaps, in fact I'm hopeful, that this year is the year that Liam finally does come back home to Leeside. Let me say as well that I believe in Irish unity, and it is a desire and expression that has been held for a long time, but I think is undoubtedly gathering momentum and undoubtedly becoming more and more a topic of political discussion and discussion amongst communities and indeed around the world. And this discussion is a significant part of that. I think it is important to ask ourselves the question, why do we believe in Irish unity? And there are many reasons. For some, it is the correcting of a historical wrong. For some, it is about communities that were separated and sundered, and national movements that were split by partition and all the harms that partition did. But to me it is that, but much more than that. It is about the potential that exists in Ireland. There's no doubt in my mind that the best manner of political organisation, the best manner of organising Irish society, the best way of ensuring that the welfare of all Irish people, of all creeds, backgrounds, can be safeguarded is through a united Ireland. But of course the path to that is challenging. I believe momentum is undoubtedly in that direction, but a good deal of work needs to happen and a lot of conversations, and that includes a lot of listening on the part of us, political representatives and Republicans, but also hearing what the people have to say in every part of the island. And that is why we're here in Cork, and we have been in dozens of towns and cities across the country to hear what people have to say, to help us shape the process to United Ireland, to help us shape the new republic. Because I believe a United Ireland is better for the people of Cork and Derry and Kerry and Antrim, for all the people of our island. An integrated Irish economy that can create a larger domestic market of 7 million people, that will make all of Ireland more attractive to international investment. I'm the Sinn Féin spokesperson on foreign affairs, and it might surprise people in the political bubble, but you know one of the first things that fairly every ambassador I meet asks me, what about Irish unity? What is the prospects of that in the coming years? It's the first thing that other governments think about when they engage with Ireland. The elimination of divergence, the barriers in trade to reduce costs for businesses operating across the island. Combining infrastructure planning to make more efficient transport networks, energy systems and digital connectivity. And I think there are many businesses here in Cork who are well aware of that. And the Cork Chamber of Commerce indeed regularly engages cross-border. They can see the potentials that exist in an all-Ireland market and in a cross-border market as well. A unified approach to education and skills development that can create a more dynamic labour market and more jobs. But also what it means for the people. It's not simply about prosperity. There's no doubt in my mind that the state, in several respects, is failing the people of Ireland, and that there are many of our needs that are not met. And I believe that a united Ireland is not simply combining two jurisdictions, is creating something altogether new, altogether more ambitious, a new republic. Isn't that worth fighting for? Isn't that worth working for? Isn't that worth engaging on? Accorda, on behalf of Sinn Féin in Cork, I hope you enjoy tonight's event.
So I'm delighted to see so many independent-minded. I recognise some of you here tonight from such a wide range of backgrounds. So before I open to the floor, I share with you my sincere hope that we'll all leave here with more ideas and perspectives than we arrived with. not just confirmation bias, and that we speak to listen, asking questions rather than listening to speak, which is kind of getting our own point in. So I suppose I want to take the temperature. How many people here would say, there's this thing I saw done in a primary school, if you're wildly enthusiastic about the kind of visions sketched out by Donncha and by Pearse at the start of the meeting. Wild enthusiasts, if you wave your hands and, yeah, okay. A lot of enthusiasts. People who might be thinking, maybe, I'd like to hear some more, I'd like to know some more. So maybe if you could raise your hands and do this, if you're brave enough. Yeah. Okay. Some people, and then really think it's a terrible idea, and what are we talking about this, and why aren't we grand? Okay. So nobody really kind of has come to that, or they're admitting to it at least. We'll take the temperature of the room at the end. So to get things started, I'm going to put some questions to our panelists here. So I'm going to ask you a few questions, and you can decide to answer some or all of them or none. So how do you visualise the future on our island? How do you see things unfolding from where we are now? Do you think Irish unity could benefit Cork? And how could people's rights and cultural identities on the island be safeguarded in a new constitution? And what do you consider to be the biggest things, in James Baldwin's words, to be faced as we consider this question? I'm going to start with you because you're next to me.
Okay. Gwyn Uisla, Fáilte Raibh Galéir. One thing about the Irish language is that, particularly in these days of inclusivity, when you're trying to include an awful lot of different groupings within a room, I find that Gwyn Uisla is such such a lovely way to include everybody. Basically, gentle people, you're welcome. Tá áthas. In fact, you know, when a Cork person says Tá an áthas, there's a temptation to say an Corn Show Glocka, but I'm not going to do that. I'm delighted to be here. I'm actually here as a substitute because Nigel couldn't make it, and I'm so honoured to be invited. I'm probably the least qualified to be here because I have huge respect for activists, and I have a huge respect for politicians, but personally I'm inclined to be more somebody who writes, and somebody who writes is more inclined to observe. And the problem about being an observer is that if you're not careful, you can become a hurler on the ditch. You know, you can be that person who's observing all the time and not engaging. Now, every now and again I do engage when, when the spirit takes me. I'll answer all those questions in one go, if you don't mind, very briefly. To start with, I'll say that I always feel really privileged and fortunate to have lived in a time of peace. I've met people over the years who have lived in not a time of peace, and it's not just about death and destruction. It's about the trauma, and it's about the paranoia. It's about the lack of opportunity. It's about the lack of creativity. It permeates everything, and it takes generations to come out. And I just think in our little city, I feel so privileged to have come through that. So I'm always very aware that that's a very delicate balance, and very grateful to have it. When it comes to a united Ireland, absolutely, I would feel very much committed to something like that, because on the bigger picture, I don't really like borders at all. So for example, like if you take the European project, people have tried to unify Europe forever, since Attila the Hun, Hannibal, Napoleon. The Germans tried it a few times, and I think the most successful unification of Europe has been the Romans, which was, I think, sometime around 48 BC, and their unification of actually Caesar, his thing was omni Gaulis divisa is partis tres. In other words, all Gaul is divided. He saw Europe as divided in three parts. He saw he called them the Germanic, warlike Germanic tribes to the north. He saw the Gauls, the French, and then beyond that, the British and the Celts. And their unification lasted for 500 years, which is quite incredible. If you look at our current situation since World War II, it's so young. And the reason their unification collapsed was the kingdom of the Sassoons, the Franks basically rose up along the River Somme. And you're sort of saying, my God, things haven't changed that much, you know. That was in the year, I think, 486 AD, you know.
Bringing you back to Cork.
Yes, but no, that's the point. The point is that, so I think, I'm not a great border person, right? Growing up in the 60s, my sense of, as a child of the 60s, my sense of, 1916 was 50 years celebrated, you know, when I was a kid, and it was a big deal, and the whole country was in behind it, and, we're off to Dublin, the Green was a big hit, and everything. It sort of captured my sort of imagination, and at that time, unification, as it was explained to me, was a process of driving out the old foe. And obviously, as time has gone on, I've revisited that, and I see it differently. And I see unification now as being a process of inviting in new cultures and inviting in cultures we share this island with, even and not just the obvious ones that we've all discussed that's been discussed earlier. There are so many different cultures within Ireland that needs to be included, and I think at a very basic level, that's how we see it.
Okay, so very valuing peace and the privilege of living in peace, questioning of borders and thinking about kind of how these have been constructed, old and new, but also instead of driving out, the inviting in. So maybe that's a good moment to move on to you, David, in terms of your day job in inclusion, and then we'll move to Bernie. So what are your
my thoughts?
Yes.
Thanks, Colette. When I was thinking about coming here to say a few words over the last couple of days, I was half tempted. I have a T-shirt at home, lads. It's a red one, and some of you probably know this now, but it's a map of Ireland, and it is Cork, and it is not Cork. I was very tempted to wear it, but I said I wouldn't, given the context of what we're talking about here tonight. But I think it's a really important point in terms of the country we're living in now and the country we would like to live in time to come. We are a multicultural country now, and there are people from all different parts of the world who've come here looking for refuge, looking for safety, looking for a welcome. And I suppose what I'd love to kind of say about tonight, Colette, is that, what I'd love to see for the future in our country, is a country that is a country of 100,000 welcomes. And, one of the kind of things that really kind of speaks to my heart a lot, it's a very old document. I'm not going to go back as far as you know, but from 1948, and it's the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. That's that UN document going back to 1948. And I'd like to maybe just read two articles. It's very short, I promise, right? So I'm not going to be reading a whole lot tonight. But Article 1, right, the most important article in that Declaration of Human Rights is that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And we are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood and sisterhood. Short sentence, nice and sweet, but I think that at times we fail to live up to that. And even where you have countries around the world that haven't faced our political history in terms of the division in this country, they have to deal with things like discrimination, racism, prejudice, and all of that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of stuff that speaks to me in my day-to-day work, in my ministry as a deacon. It's that kind of empathy that some of our speakers earlier spoke about, of the other. Empathy with people who are living on the margins, who are struggling to make ends meet and couldn't care less if the country is run by one political party or another, and couldn't care less that if they're to get help, that they get it from a statutory organisation or a community and voluntary sector organisation. All they care about is making ends meet and actually maybe coming through a struggle that they're in the middle of, and finding some peace and joy in their lives. The second article that I'll quote is from, what article was it? A second there now. So it actually is Article 25, and it states that everyone has a right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of themselves and of their families, including, very basic stuff here, food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond their control. I've worked for nearly 30 years, Colette, with people who struggle every day. And I think one of the words that you used about me in your introduction was that I try to be practical, and to try and make a difference in terms of the work that I do and the team that I have around me, because certainly what I do in Cork and Kerry, because I do have a regional brief in terms of the work that I do every day, I'm surrounded by gifted people, and I'm surrounded by people who go above and beyond every day. And while we can be very critical of the deficits and maybe the lack of certain things that should be happening within our health services or within education or employment or anything like that in our country, there are people that we have to see who are heroes. In many ways, from my point of view, these are the kind of people who go above and beyond every day in the work that they do to serve the people who struggle to make ends meet. I could talk on it, so I know you want me to maybe just wrap up now as well, Colette, but I think that unless we have a country in the future that is open and welcoming, and treats people with dignity and respect, we're living in a world where politics is broken. We see it every day. We see it in the United States, and we see it in other parts of the world where things seem to be falling apart. But there are people who are fighting against that, and I think that's really important. And we have to fight for the hope that we should have as a human species, and hope for those who are struggling every day in their lives.
Okay, well, I mean, there's a lot of common ground between what you said, Conal and David, in terms of a country that invites people in for the future, a country that's based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and makes that real, particularly Articles 1 and 25, and where everybody can live a decent life. And Bernie, now turning to you, and then it'll be over to the floor.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you as well for the invitation to be here from the organisers and from Sinn Féin. I'm going to move slightly away from the human-centred anthropogenic, solely anthropogenic view, and think about nature as well. So maybe looking back as well, we unify this country by calling it the Emerald Isle. And maybe just to say that that romantic vision of an Emerald Isle also makes us think that we have quite a healthy environment out there. In fact, Ireland is one of the countries with the least amount of natural environment left in the world, not just not just in Europe. So that's quite stark. The other thing to think about is everything we rely on, the air that we breathe, the fresh water that we drink, the fish that we fish from our big marine area, also the food that we produce on our land, everything, it relies on, clean air, soil, water, and a healthy biosphere. and we're not looking after it. We have a very poor state of the environment, both north and south in this country. And I suppose what I would love to see is that we know that that's the best asset that we have in this island, in this shared island, and that these assets have to be used in a very careful way, and not necessarily that it's all about economic growth. We hear about economic growth all the time, but actually what we need is frugal abundance, so that exactly the things that David is talking about and Conal, that not only people are able to meet their basic needs, but they're actually able to live very healthy and well in life, and also that all the non-human species that share this island can do likewise. We just sent a report to the EU of our Article 17 report showing that only 10% of our habitats are in favourable status. So we haven't been doing well in terms of looking after the very asset that we all rely on. And what my vision would be is that we have much more stronger endorsement of the UN as well, right to a healthy environment. And the UN Special Rapporteur was here in UCC last Friday, and we got to meet with her about the fact of how we're not actually really ensuring that people in Ireland have that right. And it is a universal UN right that all citizens have. So I suppose my vision would also be about relationships. I think in our own communities, we all are different. We have different histories, we have different experiences. We don't all get along all of the time. But I think on a tiny island like we have, that we share, relationship building and trying to look for the common good. We don't hear that word very often, and yet it was something that, Padraig Pearse and others in the past talked a lot about, and there was that sense of doing things for the common good. And we don't seem to be doing things for the common good. We seem to be doing things, and we seem to have benefited those 10 to 20% that have most of the wealth in this country. So to redistribute and to have policies that really do that, we really need to have a much different thinking about economic growth only. And we're working on that at the moment, because the International Degrowth Conference is coming to Cork next August in 2027, and really looking forward to that and having different conversations about that as well, because I think that is what will deliver for everybody on this island. And in terms of unity, the environment needs, yes, as was said, the birds, the dragonflies, the fish in the rivers themselves, they flow down into the south. We saw the flooding in Carlingford because of this. We need to treat, the environment as an all-island thing. And there are very positive initiatives happening in that regard, and very good relationships being built. I have sat next to people from the Ulster Angling Association and had conversations with them, because they care deeply about clean water as well. And I suppose the other thing underlying all of that is, I would like people to have access to food that's healthy, not poisoned by chemicals. I would like people to have access to clean water and not have a lot of these, you have a lot of problems within the system, and it's poisoned with nitrates, phosphorus and chemicals as well. So I would like people to really have access to a healthy environment and health in their life.
Okay, thank you very much, Bernie, taking us off into the realm of our basic needs in terms of food, in terms of balancing economic growth, and I love the concept of frugal abundance. That's something I think we can think about. So now it's your turn. So I'm going to take questions in sets of 3. So who'd like to be the brave person to open, and a question rather than a comment, if at all possible.
Jesus
indeed.
Just couple of questions. When Kate Cowan moderation Nodruk na here, would we be better off? Riv, ein tunatira, nonis massa as teresh ein tunatira. On Kestela na on Gaelga. Caishasig an Gaelga in era nua, matamit con into a vegging, where the Irish language stand hopefully in a better position. As you said already, there, for new people coming into the country, I think the Irish language is very important to help them to assimilate. agus ina long cásanna tá siad actually níos fearr ná na héirnig ag picús sús tangacha na daoine ón Eorp agus áit na eile. And just finally, then the economic, the economy, we may come over again there, Shachtana, August, ag Upton, coalition for Upton, 4 dini bas and Shin or Sunny here, and August Sheffield come as civilians, 4 bas freshen. And I heard on the same day, actually, more Abbey, they actually gave their lives for freedom. Were they thinking about the economy? I doubt it. They were thinking about Gwail na Héireann, the reconquest of Ireland. But I mean, Ireland has a lot of natural resources. We're rich in abundance and food and all of that. So I think the Staatsservishig, they have a big job, right? We're just ordinary people down here. They want to get their act together. And the Staatsservishig, Caig siad plan curla chéile, an rialtas, Micheál Martin Agustini Cosúlis. Sinna tálar agam gur a míle maithagad.
Gur a míle maithagad. Pointí an atáchtach atá that you've raised, and I'll just bring in the Irish language, cost and what costs were people thinking of when they made sacrifices before, and the need for the civil service and the government to step up to the mark to start planning were some of the things. Any other person would like to make a contribution? Thank you.
Good evening. I just have a question. Is that it seems to me that in modern Ireland we're living not so much in a country but in a post-national, post-Christian economic zone, an entity that Enda Kenny called Ireland Inc. And I'd like to know, why should Ireland Inc. gamble their money and potentially the lives of our soldiers and policemen to take the Northern Ireland from Britain and then just add it to the EU? What benefit is it? And is it worth the risk? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that question of peace and gambling, peace and violence, and for what, is something that has come up, in a lot of the surveys that have been done about people wondering and considering this question. So that's an interesting question. Anybody else? So, woman in the front.
Gormagut, Helen Vernack, Common Charlie Hurley, Drayton Abounded. I'm just wondering, I thought we were here to talk how we get a united Ireland. And personally, I think our biggest problem are the unionists. Now, just to say quickly, I have a great pal from Lisnaskea. I met her on holidays. She's died in the wool unionist. She is died in the wool Protestant. Fair play to her, she's entitled. And when her mother needed above in Lisnaskea helpers, 3 helpers a day, she said to me, what'll I do? I said, you're living second next door to Arlene Foster. Why don't you do something politically to get? That's what we do in the 26 counties, I said. Very good, she said. She went away and got her 4 helpers by contacting the local council. Lovely girl, she said. Anya helped me. I said, geez, that's a funny name for a young one in the D. Oh no, she said, I went to Sinn Féin. I went to Sinn Féin council office, or the Sinn Féin councillor in Lisnaskea to get it. So my question is, what do we do to encourage unionists to want to live with us? And my second question is, why are we not inviting Linda Irvine, sister-in-law of the late David Irvine of Pup, for whom I had a lot of respect, why she runs classes in Irish above in Belfast. Why are we not inviting her down here more? Gurmil Magat.
Okay. So, really interesting observations about your lived experience in chatting to somebody about their needs and how they're met. And as David said earlier, people don't really care where the help comes from once it comes. So how we engage that conversation. Anybody in the audience, any responses to that? Why, Linda, my daughter is actually going to her Irish classes in East Belfast, but why not have people, making contact with each other across the border? I've been really shocked at how little contact we have, particularly in Cork, with the North. And I know I was chatting with Grace, who came from Tyrone, never in Cork before. So that kind of contact, that kind of persuasion, that kind of practicality. Anybody in the audience like to answer some of the questions that have been raised? Yep.
Hello, is Misha Eileen Neelanord, o Gaeltacht Fúsgrí, bhvalum cohorta chasína brishin ban, glóta seo o churcaig, an cart fadike, bachor, cruide a churamachgadi Linda Irvine, tá an méidsan obair diantaice hos a mé firste, chun drohad a dhéanamh idir na Protestúnaigh agus na Cathlaigh. Ní bhaineann an teanga le religiún, baineann sé le gachéine. So that's what we need to get across. Language is ours. It's not mine, it's not yours, it's ours. And it's a shared way of gaining ahantas. So I think, well said to this lady and to the other gentleman here. Also, I think on Realtas, they really need to have people on the ground who are making people aware of the language, what and how it can enrich people's lives. If you go into any village, Shroudvale, in the county of Cork, or in the island of Ireland, or dare I say it, in the 6 counties, place names, translate the place name back to the Irish language, and you will get a totally different meaning. Canturk, what does it mean? Nothing. Ceann Turk means the head of the boar. So you need to bring it back to grassroots, and at the end of the day, we're all the same. Language builds barriers. We can see that, and we're all very similar, actually, more than what people think. Culture, language, it's all the same thing, and it's our identity. So if we're thinking of a national and an all-Ireland nation, we need to take it as a whole and not just, split it into Cuige Moon, Cuige Olla, Cuige Connacht. You take the whole as it is.
So you would see language, and the Irish language in particular, as a key plank in creating those relationships and those points of contact and understandings. And you think it would be like the other woman saying, kind of creating an invitation, because there's no reason why we need to finish what we've started tonight. So if there was enthusiasm, we could well organise that invitation to Linda.
And just one more point. Okay. There's a symposium or a conference happening in Monaghan, Cúnta Muoinecháin, de Cheadín Sechuin, and it's an all-Ireland thinking, coming together, talking about festivals. A festival is a great way to bring people together. Okay. And again, that's taking in our heritage, our culture, our language. It's all interspersed. Okay. So that's my point.
So given this is kind of coming on the cultural side of things, Conal, have you any comments to what you're hearing coming from the floor?
What you were saying there is actually putting your finger on the button, really. The reality is that, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier, it's a really slow process to sort of assume that it can just happen overnight. That's something that will cause, I think, other problems down the line, right? And so the questions that you'll be raising, that we're all raising, really, that sense of, will it destabilize? Will it create more stress, more tension? Like, they're the kind of fears that people have. But I think the way around that is exactly as the woman from Charlie Hurley coming and the other lady said there, that it's the thin edge of the wedge that sort of makes the gap. And I think that is things like culture, and I think also if language is something that's going to be used to bond. My mother used to always say, I mean, it's a regular thing that Neil Ain looked and all this, that like information is no weight. And to agree with this gentleman here about the Irish language, Tommy on a Hishkin Quisik Mark, not Neil Main on a kind Crean cart, a fraggle at Asperger. But the point I'm making is that it's very important that that the language isn't used as a barrier as well, which could be in certain places. So as much as I would totally, and my father, as you know, used to speak Irish at shop counter and that, and it was very important to us growing up. But in the process of what we're talking about today, or this project, sometimes things like that can become a stumbling block in the short term. I think in the long term, it's culturally a positive thing, and that's a good thing.
Okay. Anybody else in the panel like to make a comment?
Could I answer that gentleman's, query as well? I mean, what we're seeing since Brexit and since, Britain is out of the EU, we're seeing a lot of divergence of policy, which is causing problems on either side of the border. So, for instance, we did a lot of work on the Single-Use Plastic Directive. And just to say that the EU, whatever people may think about it, it has been very good in terms of environmental legislation, and we would have no environment left if it weren't for our EU environmental legislation, to be fair to it. So we're seeing, that there's a leaky border there in terms of they have some bans, but they don't have the same kind of bans that we have. That's happening across the board on a whole range of policy issues where we're seeing divergence now, and it's more difficult. So, and it's even more difficult in terms of maybe working relationships. So there's very strong working relationships, between the Irish Environmental Network, for instance, and the Northern Irish Environmental Link. I'm on the board of the Community Resources Network of Ireland, and we also help to support and set up the Northern Ireland Resources Network. So there's a whole lot of work being done. There's an Irish network of learning cities. Belfast is a healthy city. Cork is a healthy city. There's an awful lot happening that's very positive. But I think, in terms of policy divergence, that's the danger when you're not in the EU, and it's probably harder from the northern point of view because they're not clear. We have the nature restoration regulation coming in now. The government is putting together its plan here. But just speaking to somebody else who works in the marine environment in Northern Ireland today, she was saying not really sure what's happening there. So there's a lot of, I think it was mentioned earlier as well about duplication and maybe doing things either side and duplicating for transport, for a whole range of other aspects as well. It's better if we have a more integrated policy framework and in our spatial planning and everything, because that will help. But I think all of these things that are in train already build on those relationships and that coming together. As Conal said, it's not, nobody's going to flick a switch and it's going to happen, but we need to build towards change, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, I guess.
Do you think that we are talking about building an Ireland Inc., or do you think we're talking about something different, or we could be talking about something different?
Well, no, what I was saying was that we live currently in Ireland Inc.
Okay.
The biggest influences in Ireland now is money men in America and the European Union. Mr. Doherty spoke about sovereignty, but we give away more and more sovereignty. And we even mock the English for trying to get some sovereignty back. So my question would be, I take on board that there would be environmental benefits to have the whole country united. But I just don't see the real benefits for a country that has given up being a country, if you know what I mean.
Okay, thank you very much. So we had language, we've been talking about sovereignty, going beyond Ireland Inc., and what would be the point of ending up with that. So any other comments or questions? Another set of three? This gentleman.
Hi, hello, my name is Roger, and I guess my question is a little bit different. I go to a lot of these conferences, and a lot of times the discussion is kind of some post-United Ireland utopia speak that we often hear. And I agree with the sentiments that everyone has shared, but my concern is more practical, and I'm more interested to, I guess, hear people's opinion on it, and to, I guess, inject something to kind of sober up the conversation a bit. The premise of this that we're talking about tonight is based on the Good Friday Agreement, and one of the gripes with the Good Friday Agreement that myself and other Republicans would have primarily is the triple lock system. So this effectively puts the outcome of the Good Friday Agreement squarely in the hands of Britain. No matter how many conversations we might have here tonight, the British decide the actual wording of any border poll, and by extension how a United Ireland would look or not look. Any such vote, calling of any such vote, is entirely dependent on when it suits the British government, and they've been virtually silent outside of dismissing the possibility of a border poll, well, at least for the foreseeable future, for a very, very long time, in the words of Boris Johnson. And thirdly, the outcome of any such vote is entirely, well, effectively has to be ratified by the British government. So the ball is firmly in the court of the British government. And I'm sorry to waffle here, I'll get to my question. I think, one part of it is that, when we look at the attitude of people like Rishi Sunak, for example, who specifically, I believe he told Sinn Féin, don't concern yourselves with a border poll. Stick to the day-to-day running of the occupation. Well, obviously, to them it's not an occupation, but to us it's an occupation, as Irish Republicans and Irish people. I guess my question is surrounding that. My belief is that Britain is obviously not an impartial bystander there to secure the democratic rights of the Irish people across the 32 counties. I'm curious to hear people's opinion on how to overcome or address the triple lock system. And I'm curious to know, are there any red lines at all that exist where you would see the need to take a more firm approach with the occupation and demand, at the very least, for those who support the Good Friday Agreement, at the very least, a basic set of criteria that can be provided to those that support the Good Friday Agreement that would qualify for the calling of a border poll, outside of the kind of, I guess, conversations that we're having versus the absolute, well, almost silence of the British government, who effectively control the outcome of the Good Friday Agreement.
So you think our hands are tied with the and you're talking about how we could untie our hands in terms of making progress. Any thoughts in the room about that point that's been raised?
Dear Boshti, I just want to make a quick point. My name is Colin. I'm also a member of the Charlie Hurley Common from West Cork, so good evening everyone. I think it's very important that people remember what was in the proclamation. Everyone talked about the august destiny of one person's ability to make a difference. I think we have to put such force on the British government from our international partners. We can draw on all sorts of unified campaigns like what happened in West Germany and East Germany. We have to remember that as a single person you can make a difference in your community. And also I'd remind people that the Italians built the rail lines to the Alps before the train even came through. They knew it was coming. And we should be going into our schools and educating as much as possible in cooperation with the Department of Education as well. Start building the groundwork with the teenagers and the 20-somethings of today, so we can actually have that vote down the line. We don't have to respect the British mandate in Northern Ireland, or in the 6 counties, excuse me. We actually have to remember the work is still going on and we have to keep going.
Okay. What kind of groundwork would you consider to be important to be doing?
Well, I think returning the Irish language at primary school level. It was always meant to be that way, and the Irish state never adopted it. If you start teaching people from the ground up about their culture, it usually leads to a more progressive society. We can build out better outcomes, Also, there is a notable amount of work being done in the North about reconciliation and repatriation of ideas. Some people in this room already know that the unionist community is starting to come on board. There is actually specific targets in the North towards a border poll. So I think we actually need to be conscious of the fact, stay positive, keep working, because it's going to be the long game that goes there and nothing else.
Okay, that very much echoes Conal's point. I'm conscious, Bernie, you were in South Africa when after Mandela was elected, and there was an amount of work done on that very point of reconciliation. Is there anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, so I suppose, it was a privilege to be there. But when I first arrived, I lived in the landlocked country of Lesotho, which was landlocked by South Africa. And when I first arrived in early '94, before Mandela came to power, people of colour were not allowed on the beach in Durban when I first went to Durban. So it was great. There was great jubilation. Some of the other people, I was on the voluntary aid programme from Ireland, APSO at the time, and some people there who had cars, helped people to get off the farms because they were miles from voting. So the sense of, I suppose, jubilation for people who had never had a vote before was really stark, and it teaches us ourselves about how privileged we are in many ways. So I guess the Truth and Reconciliation happened there. People criticised it because people didn't get sentences or go to jail, but it was a watershed for a lot of people. And I know one person whose wife and child were killed in Angola who, found it at least out there in the open, and the truth was out there. I was just saying, there's also Rupa Magya, who's working with Trinity now, who had to leave San Francisco because of demonstrating against the bombing of hospitals in California, in San Francisco. And in the film that she's was in, Farming is Medicine, they talk about a reckoning as well. So I suppose we have to, I think just being very open, and it was already said about respecting the difference and respecting what people have been through. But I'm in West Cork. I didn't go to the Northern Ireland because it was the last place you would have thought to go in the 70s and 80s. So I didn't go there until I was 27. In 1991 was my first time that I went across the border. So I can't even pretend to imagine what it was like growing up there. As Conal said, we grew up in relatively peaceful times. But of course, it's West Cork was also very, I went to school with people when the hunger strikes were on with black bands. So, there's things embedded in all of our memories, but I can't pretend to know what the issues to bring along the other people in the community is. It's very challenging, because of what was there. And I think we all have to work really hard in whatever way we can in building those relationships, like I said earlier, and in finding things of common ground for a common future, and that one of hope. I think, going back to that idea that we all have to hope for a better future, and I think people definitely hope for a better future for their children, grandchildren, and in terms of the environment, that's always been the key, like that it's around future generations, what we're leaving for future generations, what we're creating for future generations. So sometimes I think we have to set aside our own differences and our issues and look more for how we can help build the common good towards a pathway that will be better for everybody, really.
Okay, Bernie, David, do you have anything to add? I'm not sure we've come back to your question about how we untie our hands. Some of it is doing the work, the groundwork, the planning, the points of common ground, the reconciliation, how language and culture can be sources of creating kind of common ties and understandings. Conal also said sometimes those things can be divisive as well, and we have to be alive to that. But I'm just wondering, David, if there's anything you'd like to add to the comments that you've heard.
I suppose from the language point of view, I suppose, Colette, and I have a 20-year-old son at home. He's my youngest, and he went to an all-Irish school for all of secondary school, and he's a fluent Irish speaker, and I'm very proud of it. When he speaks, I don't understand half of the stuff that he's saying, because I suppose I grew up in a time where Irish was compulsory. English, Irish and maths were compulsory in primary school and secondary school. You had to do it to leaving cert, and I did. And I'm, I'm blown away by people who speak Irish fluently, and I have little bits of Irish, but I couldn't converse fluently with somebody Oscoilge. And that's a sad reflection in many ways of how we were taught Irish. I look at my 20-year-old son, and he was in all-Irish school, and they spoke it not only when they were studying Irish, but they spoke it when they're on their breaks at school and all of that. But I think we have to be very careful as well in terms of forcing a language on people. And there were a couple of comments that grated with me a little bit as we were kind of going through the conversation there. I mean, one of the things that I'd be really excited about, and again, in terms of my work with people who are here from other countries, people who are here because they were trafficked, and these are people who are very vulnerable, who've had horrible experiences in their lives. And I kind of think, what's the purpose of language? One of the very basic things about language is that we can communicate with each other. And whether we agree or disagree with what we're saying to one another in terms of, politics or culture or whatever else is going on in terms of what's important to you in your life, the purpose of language is about being able to communicate with another human being. And one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of the future, and again, because we are talking about the future here, like is developments in relation to technology, for instance. And one of the things that we've been trying to roll out in the last couple of years in our work in terms of migrant health and people who are coming from lots of different countries all over the world is this little device that we have called Pocket Talk, where it can translate immediately. I don't know, is it something like up to nearly 100 languages on this device? And I think we'll be moving into that kind of space in time where we will be able to communicate with anybody when we travel abroad. And again, for us living in a country like this, there's very few of us getting into small boats trying to escape persecution or oppression or anything like that. So I think we have a lot to be grateful for in the kind of country that we live in, and the benefits of living in a time of peace, and relatively speaking as well, in a place where there's relative prosperity, even though lots of people that I work with don't experience that, right? That's another conversation, I suppose. But it is about kind of trying to bridge the divide, I think, between cultures as well, Colette. I mean, we are moving into this space, I think, in terms of, every country will kind of grow and prosper, and things will change. Are we going to be a country of Céad Míle Fáilte in the future or not? I mean, these are the kinds of, coming back to my point earlier on in terms of, the Declaration of Human Rights, are we going to be a country that's based on something like that, or is it going to be something very different?
Okay, do you want to say?
No, just a small thing, because that whole thing of reaching out across the border, like I remember, like in the 70s, a lot of the families that were coming down here who basically, they were being burnt out basically, and they were arriving to our street because our street was sort of an interface at the time. It's downtown, and they weren't universally sort of welcomed, even though they integrated really quickly, and now they're very much part of the city and they're very much involved in the music scene and all that kind of stuff. But at that time I remember that sense of hands across the border. The FAI introduced a thing called the Black Snit Cup, and the idea was that the cup winners in the Northern League would come down and play the cup winners in the Southern League, right? And what they didn't take into account was that the winners in the Northern League wouldn't be Derry, who were basically in the Southern League, but they would be teams like Linfield and Glentoran, who would have very strong unionist backgrounds, right? So when they were coming, the idea was this would be a hands across the border friendship thing. And every time they came down, there was war, because not only from the local population, but also the people from Belfast who had relocated here had, I suppose, issues to resolve. But getting back to your question below, for a long time there has been very subtle working sort of projects on the go, and like Christo de Barraud for a long time has been like bringing children from Troubles-Town, and then even now recently in the last 20 years anyway, you'd have things like Metal Mara going to Belfast to build Corks, and then Belfast boat builders coming here and bringing up the Dragon boat and that kind of thing, and reading sort of exchanges between, like, we'd have a Scribes in Cork and a Scribes on the Falls. So, like, it's sort of happening, but the mad thing about reaching out is that we're sort of preaching in a funny way to convert it here, right? Because even within our own community, there are probably people who wouldn't be so, I suppose, welcoming of this idea that everybody here is. So it isn't just about reaching out to the old enemy. It's about informing everybody, really, about a way forward. Yeah.
How enthusiastic do people think people are in Cork? I mean, obviously there was a fairly ringing endorsement for the conversations we were having tonight. That's not surprising because you've turned out. But, you know, just from your own friendship groups, your workplaces, what you hear on the ground, how would you gauge the level of kind of interest or enthusiasm?
Yeah, if I could just link what we were talking about just before that question, right? I think for me, and we were talking about what it means for Cork, my observation, and some of my work colleagues would say the same, right? What we're trying to do here is open up the question, am I united or am I, right? And some people have spoken tonight saying that there'll be a level of opposition, obviously from unionism, you'll have opposition from British government. But I think Pierce opened up earlier on tonight and said, one of the biggest problems we have at the moment about getting the conversation out there is that there's a Cork man leading the government and he doesn't want to engage in the conversation. And that for me is a huge problem. When the leader of the country, regardless of what party is, for me this issue should be pan-party, and I know the government parties don't always back Sinn Féin in kind of anything, but this is the one topic that you need the leader of the country and you need the government parties on board in this in order to open up the conversation to a bigger context. Because any time a Sinn Féin TD might raise this in the dial, as long as the Taoiseach of the country is throwing cold water on it, you're behind the 8 ball straight away. But I think if you get the government parties behind this, and it's a pan-party initiative, well then the conversation opens up more.
So you think that's a critical...
100%, 100%.
And so people would say that, you know, we get the governments that we deserve, that they're a mirror to ourselves. What bit of reluctance do you think is there in the lack of enthusiasm, as you rightly put it, to having conversations about this within the leadership of the current government?
Well, that's $1 million question because they call themselves the Republican Party, but look, you know, we could have a separate meeting on that another night. It's a huge question. It's a huge question as to what they're afraid of, or, you know, maybe I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I'm just giving my observation and from speaking to colleagues, like, you know, and we do have the conversation more. But I'll go back on what I said. As long as it becomes a bigger conversation, it won't get the traction.
Okay. So you think that really sort of getting buy-in from sort of all the mainstream parties in 100%. The country, and that it isn't just Sinn Féin organising events like this, that it's all the parties and all the clubs and all the men's sheds and everywhere else, the women's groups, all of that is part of moving things along.
Well, if it wasn't for Sinn Féin putting it on the agenda, it may not be there at all. So we have to build, so we as Republicans, the real Republicans, right? We have to build on the momentum that's there now and keep it growing, and just hope that it takes seed and grows. But like, as I said, I don't want to repeat myself. We need everybody involved in this.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? You got a round of applause there. Anybody else kind of echoing that or challenging that?
I was just following up what our colleague down there said. It seemed to me that the debate, rightly started by Sinn Féin, has led on to a sort of can be sometimes accused of being top-down, and I think we need to go bottom-up based on that, not non-party certainly, but engaging communities. Now, I can't get into definitions of communities. All I can offer you is that I spent about 30 years in the UK working in the race relations business. And one of the key things, race relations, one of the key functions that we discovered was by engaging with people with different aspects, different perspectives on things, bring them together, talking it through, hard work. But we got change. I mean, this is at a micro level. We got change through having the support of the communities. And I think whilst we have a problem with Micheál Martin, I think the more you can get and the communities involved, the stronger it will be. Now that applies to Northern Ireland as well, and I suspect that people like that Pierce was talking about in Derry, they may be more interested in a united Ireland than many people in the Republic might be. So the unionist is another issue, but I think we still have an argument to persuade people in the Republic, possibly non-working class people, of the basic, the reasons for united Ireland. And I still think, but all the cultural stuff, that the economic argument is quite a key one in this process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. David, I'm thinking, any thoughts do you have about that kind of generating grassroots conversations about what we're talking about tonight, so that it's bottom up as well as top down?
It's very hard work. That's something that doesn't happen easily, and I suppose my own training is in community work. Like, so I studied history initially in UCC many years ago, and when I finished that I did a Master's in Social Science in Youth and Community Work. And community work is very hard to define, but I think it's something that is hugely powerful as well, in terms of generating kind of momentum at a grassroots level. And I think that, we can learn from lots of things that have been very successful in terms of bringing about change, when you actually do that very hard work. But it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of time as well. It's not something that happens very quickly. But there was a comment made earlier on there as well about the power that's within each and every one of us as well, because I think that each and every one of us can contribute to some little bit of change in another person's life every single day in terms of engagements that we have with other people. And one of the kind of heroes that I have in terms of political figures and what have you is the likes of Martin Luther King, and thinking about the death of Jesse Jackson only in the last couple of days. And again, I suppose this speaks to me as well, because I know it's not the same for everybody. But when we listen to each other in conversation, some of the kind of some of the things that I like to listen out for is, is somebody speaking with a heart full of hate, or are they speaking with a heart full of love? And there's a big difference in terms of somebody maybe contributing to conversation with a heart full of hate or a heart full of love. And I like to think of that little line that Martin Luther King said once upon a time, where it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. So there's lessons for us to be learned in terms of how we actually kind of reach out across divides that are there within the room here, but at a bigger level in terms of at a national level, and how do we kind of work hard to bring about a better Ireland for the future, because I think that's what we all want, So, whatever happens in our lifetime, or maybe in our children's lifetime, if it's a better Ireland that is, an Ireland of 100,000 welcomes, and maybe even more than that, then I will certainly kind of be a very happy man in terms of, what potential this country has. We are a small nation, and that's been referred to a couple of times in terms of the contributions that have been made. But we box above our weight in lots of different areas at an international level, and I think people around the world see that. So I'm very hopeful, and I suppose people are probably listening to me saying, am I kind of with it at all? But I am a very optimistic person. I am a glass half full person, and I don't think I could have done the work that I've done for the last 30 years or so if I wasn't. Because there's such things to be hopeful for in lots of communities, and even in those communities, like, as one of my kind of favourite places to have worked in the city here many years ago was in Knocknaheeny. North side of the city, huge disadvantage. I was working in a crime diversion project up there at the time as a youth worker, and despite the challenges that those individuals, those young children were facing in terms of what they were living in poverty and huge structural inequalities, because these are the kinds of things that we need to face as a country, at a political level, at a government level. Like, it's about dismantling those structural inequalities that exist, to raise every ship, and that's easier said than done, of course it is. But when we have a fairer society, when we have a society that's more just, then we'll have a better society and a better Ireland in the future.
Okay. Thank you. There's a person here who wants to make a contribution. I was also thinking, what role could the trade union movement help with generating some of these conversations? But maybe we'll come back to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't talk to trade unions. My name is Owen. I have a slightly schizophrenic job in that I run an unsupervised injection facility, and I also run Cork's most popular paid visitor attraction. So my typical morning is picking up needles in the morning and dealing with international visitors through the day. My question is a question around social justice and the capacity of the system to solve problems. The integration of two businesses creates a lot of problems. The integration of two countries is going to create more problems. I don't see a capacity within the system to solve obvious problems. So how are we going to generate the capacity to solve the really big questions that are being asked here today? That's my question.
Okay. Anybody from the floor like to respond to that? That's throwing a question down to us, a gauntlet. Okay. Person with, yes.
Okay, so I'm a northerner living in Cork, so I embody what we're looking for. No, I'm really impressed by what Dave and you're saying there about community and inclusivity and diversity. That's the type of Ireland we want, the ecology, the environment. But the real enemy isn't within. It's actually the massive oligarch businesses. This man said about Ireland Inc. Who's going to control that? Because they want us divided. How do we keep that division? How do we keep that sort of community going when all they want is kind of, you know, we see it from the government today, the movement towards militarisation. We see this as the way, the sucking of the wealth upwards. Vulture funds come in, housing problems, get the privates, get the profit going out, and we're left with nothing behind. So the real challenge for me, for a future Ireland and together, is recognising the common enemy is actually these multinationals that suck the wealth and the goodness and create division on the ground. So part of our kind of thinking has to be, you know, yes, we want diversity, we want inclusivity, we want differences, that's good, but we want to be recognised who the common enemy is. And it's not within, it's actually those multinationals are sucking the wealth out, and then they're minions who actually perpetuate it. And I think the government at this moment is a minion. They don't listen to people anymore, they're sucking the wealth out of the ground. So that's my contribution to the...
So your contribution is around the much bigger picture, the world that we're part of, and the kind of those who are kind of controlling the power, and what do we do now today, but what would a new entity do in relation to kind of challenging that and facing the common enemy?
And we must start here, start local as well to address that.
And then the other challenge from the other side of the room is we've got big problems here and now. Do we have the capability and the capacity to deal with them, because there would be challenges to be dealt with on an all-island basis in terms of, access to healthcare, not having waiting lists, affordable housing. So that was your challenge, and your challenge is how do we deal with the forces that are around us, shaping our destinies in the world. Any thoughts before I turn to the panel on those questions? You may have your own, but big questions, big challenges. Yes, gentleman in the front.
Yeah, I suppose it's kind of on.
I'm sorry, there's a gentleman with a cap. Sorry.
Me, is it? Yeah.
Yes, you, and then
that's me.
And then the gentleman in the front. Yeah.
I suppose it's kind of following on from Kieran's question, and I'm not really hearing it acknowledged tonight. I suppose the title is The Commission on the Future of Ireland, and when I look at the word future, youth is so key to that. And we're talking about designing a new Ireland, but we're living, like my generation is generation locked out. The idea of simple things like home ownership, starting a family, like what are the things we can do today to build this Ireland that we want? Are we building an Ireland to attract the challenges that we're going to get from unionism? Or are we just going to keep trying to promote? What can we take responsibility for today?
And how do you think we might arrive at finding those answers?
Well, I suppose it was mentioned here, and Kieran mentioned it, the idea of Ireland Inc., the idea of I suppose GDP is a measure of everything, isn't it? And when you have a youth that is leaving the country at an astronomical rate because the idea of even starting a family has become unattainable to so many people, are we really this country that we let on that we are? Do you know? So I think there's some inevitable uncomfortable things to bring about that change. And are we ready to do that?
Okay, and what do you think? Do you think we're ready to do that?
I think we have a massive challenge, like this man next to me spoke about in Dáil Éireann with our current government. It's been talked about over and over again, do you know? There's some real, there's some inevitable pain to this change, and I don't know the issues Karen just spoke about, do you know?
So you would see that we have big problems right now, and that getting to the place, so the world that we've been describing is desirable, but there's pain on the way.
There's pain is inevitable to that, but I suppose the big thing that I'm saying is we're here today talking about a new Ireland, and we're not acknowledging the fact that for the current generation, the idea of a family, the idea of a house, the idea of home ownership, it's not attainable.
The basics
so
that David...
how do we change the basics like that?
Yeah.
What are the changes that we need to acknowledge today to make those simple things that are so key to everybody's motivation and ambition? How do we bring about those changes today to make an Ireland that is attractive, to make it an Ireland that attracts people in? That melts all the challenges to me, do you know, in my area. I believe in an Ireland based on equality and social justice. And are we there today? And how do we get there?
Okay. So it's the here and now as well as the future.
The here and now.
Gentleman in the front, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kesgar Margaret. So I just wanted to add my observation since I moved to Ireland 14 years and someone who grew up in partition, still that partition is actually going ahead. Two things actually kept unity between Kurdish people, which I am half Kurdish, half Armenian. But you know that Kurdistan is divided in 4 different countries. So what I noticed there are 2 things actually help us to keep that Kurdish ethnic identity was language and music. So I just wanted to also ask your opinion on music before, I wanted to also participate as well. Language was most important part, but slowly we are losing that as a ethnic identity as well, because as you don't have your country, what it happens, my main language was Turkish. I learned Kurdish later on because my parents, they didn't want to teach the Kurdish. They saying financial reason. If you learn, you won't get job. This is things. There is no job in Kurdish. There is no job in Irish. So same story probably you heard as well. And your accent, because of the language, if we teach you, when you talk, accent will give you trouble. So try to talk like a Turkish person. So when I talk Turkish, it's flawless, even better than Turkish people. Because we had that fear, they will understand that I'm Kurdish, I won't get the job as well. So, but what happened here, if I don't talk my language, slowly, the Turkish identity with their language, because we need to understand that the language itself has the identity inside, has a history, all your legend, all your behaviors and everything is hidden inside the language. When you lose that, you talk Turkish, you talk British, you talk English, you became a Turkishman, you became an Englishman, you became a Frenchman, because you will act like that as well. So I am so glad to hear that so many people are pushing for the language and for the revitalizing the Gaelic. This is very important. It is a responsibility for everyone, not only for Irish people, for anyone who living on this land.
So from your experience, a very particular experience of partition and language loss and the importance of it, we've got a term called Tirgan Tonga, Tirgan Anam. A land without language is a land without soul. So what have you learned that might be of value to us as we dream and think about, notwithstanding the huge problems that we do have in the here and now, in terms of thinking? What would your...
The main importance, I would say, one thing that it actually helped a lot, which I didn't hear tonight, the music itself. Because I didn't find the Irish language inside the Irish music a lot, and that was missing, because music helps a lot to move and help the language to live. And both sides of the border, obviously there is no border, but like North and South, we can connect in that way, because there is an identity, there is a reason to connect to each other. And one last thing to reply to my colleague there, and same experiences happened to us. They kept telling us, Kurdish people, they don't need unity, they don't need the country, they need the work, they need the family, they need future, they need money and job. By doing that, colonizer made us to lose the identity, because then, yes, my main thing is this: I don't need the country, I don't need the identity.
But for you, it's more than the economy, which is the point I think a gentleman over here was making, that it is much bigger than that. But we do live in the here and now, where people have to live as well. Okay, questions? Others? Thank you very much for that.
Hi. Yeah, hi, my name is Morris Fitzgerald. I've got a question here. A United Ireland doesn't necessarily have to happen. It's not a requirement. It seems to be only a requirement for Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin seem to be more interested in a United Ireland than most of the people in this country. There's not a great deal of discussion on it. Sinn Féin have been kind of keeping these forums going for long, which is very commendable in all said and done. But really, at the end of the day, there's not a great deal of interest in a United Ireland as such. We have a lot of work to do in this country anyway. I mean, who the hell do we think we are looking for a United Ireland when our country's done so badly in the post-colonial state? We've thrown out immigrants one after the other, immigrant after immigrant. We've got 350 doctors leaving the country every year. I mean, we can't sustain hardly our own country, never mind the United Ireland. And it's been said 100,000 times. We can barely run our own country. So who the hell are we? Who do we think we are? Demanding a United Ireland, or even looking for it? Simple as that. Thanks very much.
So that's a very provocative, stimulating comment. Anybody like to answer that? Who the hell do we think we are to be talking about this here tonight? Yep, Laura.
Hi everyone. I just wanted to say thanks first of all to Sinn Féin for hosting this meeting this evening, and for leading out on this conversation as well. You know, in Ireland, I'm in the Labour Party myself, and I know that other parties were invited, as well, and I think that meant a lot, and I was delighted to get the invitation. And I think we need more of these discussions. And I suppose I just wanted to say that personally, I feel very strongly about reunification. I think there are huge benefits culturally, socially, economically. I think could be a huge healing moment for the country. And I agree with the previous speaker who was saying that we needed a whole new vision to be implemented for this country. And I do think that the current government are shirking their responsibilities by not planning adequately for a border poll. So I did want to say that, but I just want to say thanks, and it's really great to be here and to listen this evening.
And thank you, Laura, and thank you for coming. Laura, to put you on the spot, is Labour thinking of doing something similar?
And I know our party leader described us as Connolly-ish Republicans, but certainly we'd love to collaborate with Sinn Féin. And as I say, tonight isn't about the Labour Party, it isn't about any party, but I wanted to thank Sinn Féin for organising it, and it's certainly something that we feel strongly about in the Labour Party. I think we'll need multiple parties and political courage to move this forward.
Okay, thank you.
My name's Sean Layden. I'm 16, and I just want to get your opinions, because obviously I'm still young, still growing up in this country, and I feel that the generation coming through at the moment, they lack the political education about our democracy, why we fought for it, everything like this. And I feel like as we grow older, when we hit 18 to vote, we're lacking that education. So I'd just like to get your opinions on maybe introducing political education into our schooling system. And as well, on the topic of education, I myself, I'm exempt from Irish in school, and we're on the topic of losing our language as a country here tonight. And I don't have that available to me in school now. I can't learn the language through my education. So I'm just thinking, as an alternative to the kind of special education classes, could we have an Irish language or an Irish history class for those who are exempt from exam Irish Irish language.
Okay, thank you very much. Very practical suggestion. Just a question to you. You said you're 16. Do you think you're ready to vote?
I wouldn't say I'm ready to vote, and I don't think any 16-year-old in the country would be ready to vote. But I suppose a lot of it is just down to the fact that the education around it is so kind of secluded to us.
Okay.
It's not available through schooling, and it's not a very popular topic among children my age.
Okay, thank you. A person over here has a hand up for ages. Thank you.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe this person first. Yeah. And we're nearly coming to the end, and now it's getting lively. Sorry.
Cahirlach Gurmila Agad, then Iha Anna Emul Erfad Anocht. Just a couple of facts. Sinn Féin is in fact to have 32 county representation, 32 county. Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil do not. So whose interest is it then to promote unification, would you think, if as Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil voter you could be seen like the turkey to be voting for Christmas, right? Something not reflected just yet in the room is the anger as well in young people. There's a lot of anger in Ireland at the moment with this idiotic government decisions and their spending. Somebody there last week thought it was okay to give the board chair of Uisce Éireann €100,000 as a salary increase. And plenty of people in this room know what they could do with €100,000 in their budget for their community work. So finally, my last question, just maybe to Pearse, is David Lane there spoke about the broken politics in the world at the moment is no more evident as it is here in Ireland tonight. So how does the huge job and the distraction of fixing this political mess we currently find ourselves here in the 26 counties affect any aspiration for the unification of our island? I.e., how are our own deep fractures getting in the way of any progress in unification?
So another provocative question, very good question, thank you. Turkey's voting for Christmas, which might explain why certain parties or people aren't out there selling these kinds of conversations. That might be one explanation. I think Pearse and Donncha might wish to say a few words, and then I'll hear from the panel, and then we'll draw to a close.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to say anything, but that question was directed at me, and then there was a couple of other points I thought would be interesting to respond to. I think the conversation's excellent, and you hear the frustration in a lot of the questions and comments about, you know, the crisis that we have here, the type of society that we have here, the provocative question of who do we think we are. You know, a very good question as well in my view, and I think this is why it is crucial that this discussion, where we are travelling, is democratised, that it is not left to the powers that be to shape the new Ireland, because that new Ireland could be a version of the 26 counties, which is not what I want. The new Ireland we need to be talking about, and we need to be creating a momentum. What does it look like? Will it have the right to housing in the Constitution? Will it continue to cede sovereignty to European Union or see the militarisation? All of these are the type of questions we have. There's very few countries in the world that gets a chance to redefine itself, to reimagine itself, and that's what we're on the cusp of. Like, I passionately believe that we are going to see a referendum within the next number of years. That's going to happen. And why do I believe it? And there was a very good question put about, the British government hold all the strings in relation to this here. Only to a certain point. Like, in the Good Friday Agreement, what was negotiated in there wasn't that there may be a referendum, but there shall be a referendum. The issue here is that the criteria is vague. And I've sat in front of Secretary of States as part of Sinn Féin negotiating team, and we've had these discussions. And many years ago they said, well, if we had a referendum now, we could be taken to court because it's part of an international agreement, it's enshrined in British law, and we believe that the opinion polls don't show that the majority support is there. There's been opinion polls that showed that a majority support is there. Even the ones that don't show that there's a majority support, the gap is narrowing all the time. I think one of the recent opinion polls said the gap is narrow as 6%. And why is the conversation, in my view, really important before we have the referendum? For two reasons. One is that we need to ensure that unionists who are not going to vote for Irish unity. It's in their name. They're unionists. They want to be part of the union. So, if they're of that belief, then we respect that. But we have to understand, and it's because some unionists believe that a united Ireland will be a thrashing of their identity, will be an erosion of their rights, and we have to engage with them and explain to them that that is not what we're talking about. The second part of it is that demographics in the North has changed dramatically. David McWilliams wrote about this in the Sunday Business Post 10 years ago, and he talked about, and he uses the terms Protestant to identify his unionism, and unfortunately in the North, and when it was established, that was unfortunate reality. But he talked about that the over 90s, 2/3 of the over 90s in the North come from a Protestant tradition, as reflected in the census in 2016. And then he talked about the under 5s, and he says it's the opposite. Demographics have changed in the North dramatically. That is why you're seeing Sinn Féin First Minister, that's why you're seeing Belfast as a nationalist city, that's why you're seeing unionists, people who were leading advocates. Davy Adams, a very senior person in the UDA, talking about a new Ireland. You're talking about people like Wallace Thompson, who founded the DUP, talking about a new Ireland. If we think that this conversation, and we can be very far removed from it in Cork or in different parts in the south, if we think that this conversation is not happening, we are naive. And that's why I'm saying there is going to be a referendum, because the train has left the station. And the question here is, and I think this is why this debate is really encouraging, is the question here is who gets to shape the new Ireland? And it has to be us. It has to be the people. It has to be us that decide that the bits that we do not like of the South or the North, then let's toss them to one side. Let's make sure that this Ireland is inclusive, that this Ireland is equal, that this Ireland has prosperity for all of the people, not just those at the 1%. That's the job that we have to do. But we also have to win the referendum, and I'll finish on this point. So it isn't a case of, I'm not naive. I know the British government will not want to cede territory. They didn't want to do it in Scotland. They won't want to do it in the North. But we have it in law, and it is constitutionally reviewable, and the momentum is gaining. 9 years ago, myself and Gerry Adams met with all the political parties in Leinster House, and we sat down and we talked to them about we need to set up a couple of forums. One of them was a committee on Irish unity, and we need to get all the parties who believe in Irish unity working together and demystify Irish unity. There was no appetite for it at that time for different reasons. We sat with Micheál Martin, Enda Kenny, the other political parties. Things have changed. Ivana Bacik, she used her presidential address at the Ardèche in relation to the issue of Irish unity. Holly Cairns, the same. Other political parties, the same. Within a year of us sitting down with Enda Kenny, a Cork man who challenged Leo Varadkar at the time for the leader of the party was arguing to set up an all-party committee on Irish unity. The sands are shifting, folks. So it is really, really encouraging, and I wouldn't be despondent in relation to all of the challenges we have here. We have massive challenges here. We have massive challenges with the direction of the European Union, but one of the ways to fix them in a radical way, with the spirit of the First Dáil, which was one of the most radical documents that was ever produced, is actually to have a united new Ireland. Throw out the bad, keep the good, and let's reinvent this nation.
Thank you very much, Piers. It's very hard to follow that, but I will ask my panellists for their last word, and briefly. One takeaway from tonight that you have picked up that you didn't have coming into the room in terms of taking us forward into the kind of world that Piers has described. David, one.
Hold on to hope, I suppose, is the thing that's always in my heart, Colette, and I suppose those issues of social justice. There's lots of us who are passionate about stuff like that, and passionate about the future as well. And while we have young people in our audience, which is fabulous to see as well, actually, we have to recognise the practical challenges again that are there for each and every one of you. We as parents look at our own children and we think, how are they going to be able to afford a home? How are they going to be able to afford rent in terms of starting families and stuff like that. So we see those practical challenges, and we have to address those, I think, in a new Ireland, in an Ireland where things are possible, and where that 1%. And it's fascinating to look at global politics. And the distractions that happen, I think, in terms of global politics, where we focus on the 1% of the trans community, we focus on the 1% of the migrant community, and you see this very clearly on your television screens every night, and we miss the kind of the glaring gap that's there between those billionaires who are milking the system and those who struggle each and every day to make ends meet.
But your word is hope. Thanks, David. Bernie?
I suppose to keep having the conversations, it's great to hear from people tonight, and it feels like it's very much at an early stage and the beginning in a way, but that we need to reach outside our own orbits as well. And I suppose one of the things that struck me is it's great to see a 16-year-old here. I think it's brilliant. And the other young person who mentioned, that they feel like a lost generation. I think we do need a commissioner for future generations here. We have one in Wales. I'm on a body called Coalition 2030, which is around the SDGs, but it has a lot of different pillars there. And we have been advocating for that with government, and it hasn't got traction. But I think we need to hear the voice of young people at that level as well. So that's a really important post that I think we should keep pushing for within the coalition, but certainly other people can push for that as well. And young people's voices, it's your future. We've had our chances. We've made a mess of the environment. We haven't done the economic points. We haven't created an economic system that benefits everybody. We don't have community banking. We don't have a lot of structural things in place that really would help people in an economic sphere as well. So I would just say that I think don't forget the young people and have them very involved in the conversations.
So keep talking and make sure that the generations who are coming through are getting their say in that conversation. Conal.
Basically, just to amplify what Owen Murphy said and what you said there, that realistically, this is just a pebble in the mill pond, and the ripples are going out. Not just so it's been going on for a long while, right? But these are part of the ripples, and to think that it's going to happen overnight, it's not going to happen, because that's where. But I think it's going in the right direction, and I think also to echo what you were saying, the 16-year-old gentleman there. I work a lot with students and things, and younger generation, and I really think that we're in safe hands. I think my generation weren't as enlightened and had a lot of prejudice maybe that I think the current generation have just way surpassed us, and I think we're in safe hands, and that's it really.
Okay.
Future.
Well, I'm going to leave you with some words of one of our youngest activists, Greta Thunberg. She said, "You're never too small to make a difference." I understand that, given my stature. So we're none of us too small to make a difference. We've had a good conversation. There's been more questions than answers, but I really think that we're on our way to something very rich in our country in terms of our future, and the possibility of throwing out the bad and getting something better, as Piers described, is really a prize worth talking about and worth fighting for. So, Gurv Mila Maha Gwyv Galer, Chak Damak Anocht.